So we're going to start by sewing our lining fabric. We're going to go across one side, across the bottom, and on the other side we are going to leave a small hole. Doesn't matter how big it is, preferably big enough to fit your hand, but we're going to leave that part open. We also will not sew across the top. So our seam allowance will be 1/2. What that means is that our needle will be 1/2 inch away from the end of the fabric. So if you look here, most machines, the edge of the pressure foot is exactly 1/2 inch from the needle. So this is the part where the needle will hit, and then right on the other edge of the pressure foot is where we are going to line up our fabric. I also like to make sure that the little opening up top is at least covered up. We don't want the fabric too far back because that part of the fabric will not get sewn down. So we at least make sure it's covering up the little hole, and then we'll start from right there. So we always begin and end with a back stitch. So what I'm going to do is come forward 2 or 3 stitches, then stop. And then this button right here is the back stitch button. What that does is make the needle go backwards. So we'll go backwards and then continue going down the front of the fabric. The reason we do this is because it'll lock the thread in place, and you want that at the beginning as well at the end of your fabric. So right here is where you see I left the mark. What I'm going to do is sew down to the mark. I'm not going to stop at the foot. I'm going to sew up some more so that my needle stops where that mark is at. Once I hit that mark, I will do a back stitch, and then I'm going to show you how we cut it off and start again. When doing the back stitch, remember to always come back forward to end it off. With my machine, my needle always stops down, so what we want to do is bring the needle up. There is a knob on the outside of your machine. This one, what you're going to do is turn it towards you, and that would raise the needle. Right here you can see that my needle is up, so the next thing we're going to do is bring the pressure foot up. Then what I like to do is pull my fabric to the left side, and right here off to the side there is a little knife. So I take my strings and cut it right there. You can also use scissors if that's better for you. But here it is. Right here you can see the back stitch, so it's just locked that in place. Now we're going to skip this middle part, and right there on the mark is where we're going to start again. So we're going to line it up right underneath the needle. Make sure the pressure foot comes down. Make sure our fabric is lined up to the inside of the foot. And then we are going to start sewing again. Remember to come down 1 to 3 stitches and then do a back stitch. And then we're going to continue forward. So when it comes to sewing, we want to make sure we don't push it or pull it. All we're doing is just guiding the fabric. So down here, we're going to get close to the edge and make sure our needle comes down. And instead of sewing and cutting it off, we are going to turn the fabric. So we make sure our needle is down. We bring up the pressure foot, and we will turn the fabric towards us. When we turn it, we want to make sure that our fabric stays on the same seam allowance so that it's at 1/2 inch and our fabric is lined up correctly. And then we just sew straight, no need to backstitch. Once we get to this edge, we're going to do the exact same thing. Make sure our needle is down, press your foot up, then turn the fabric towards us. As you can see right here, I'm a little bit over, so what I'm going to do is put my pressure foot back up, turn the fabric back around, and stitch down maybe 1 or 2 stitches so that my fabric lines up perfectly. So this is at the edge. Here we'll get as close to the top as we can. Then we are going to do a back stitch because this is the end of our sewing line. So we're going to cut off next. But before we cut off, we always do a back stitch. So we back stitch and then we'll come back forward. Then we're going to bring our needle up, press your foot up, and then we're going to cut it off. So here is the lining all done. We have all 2 sides done, and then the 3rd side will have your 1 opening. Remember to leave 1 side open because that is the top. So before we do the same to the front, you're gonna put on your patch. Now if you ordered the fabric from me, they come with this special little patch that I make myself. You can find anywhere you want to put it. Just make sure if you put it off to the bottom corner, we leave space because we'll have to attach the top. The bottom middle is a good place. I personally like it at the top. So once we figure out the spot, then we'll pin it in place. My favorite thing to do is to use my fingers since measurements can be off. I use either 2 or 3 fingers from the top edge of it, and then that's where I will pin my patch on so I can sew it down. When we go to pin it down, just remember we are pinning it through 1 layer of the front fabric, not both. So it'll just be through 1 layer. Normally use clips, but for something like this where you are sewing something in the middle of a project, clips don't really work, so I'll have to use these pins so that it holds it in place while I sew it. So when we attach the patch, it'll be lined up with this center line, which is about 1/8 from the actual stitching. I like to put it on the 1/8 line because it'll be close enough to the edge without actually coming off the edge. The patch being a different color really helps so that you can see where that line is at. As you can see, I lined up my black patch with that center line right here. For this part, you can backstitch, but because I am doing a complete square around the entire patch, I am only going to backstitch at the end because the end of it will go across the beginning, and then I will backstitch over that. We're also using the corner turn, so make sure the needle is down when you turn it and then cross over. Right here you can see that the fabric is a lot bigger than the throat of the machine, so all I do is just fold it up so that it fits inside there, making sure that it does not come close to the needle. With this Fox vinyl, I did have to push it just a little bit. Sometimes it does get stuck, so use your judgment to see if you might need to push it a little bit. Just don't push it or pull it too hard. Right here you can see that I turned it around and I'm going back over my existing stitch just a little bit, and then I will back stitch. So with that back stitch is going to go over both the beginning and the end of the stitch line. Just want to make sure we cut both the top and the bottom string. Sometimes when we end in the middle, you can't see the bottom string and we'll pull it too far. So just make sure you get both strings. We're going to do the exact same thing that we did with the inside of our fabric to the outside. So we're going to put the outside fabric together, making sure it is pretty sides together. So what I'm going to do is lay this one down pretty side up, and I'm going to take the other fabric and lay it pretty side down so that they are touching. Make sure the sides are all lined up, and we're going to sew from the top of one side, go all the way down across the bottom, then back up the side. We will not be leaving any holes on this one except for the top half. We were not going to sew shut. I like to use these little clips because they help keep the fabric together, as well as does not stab me, because pins I typically stab myself with. So like I said, we're going to sew from one side all the way down, then we're going to go across the bottom, then back up the other side. No need to leave a hole except for the top edge. Here we are. I went ahead and sewn down the side, across the bottom, and up the other side, not the top. Our next step will be to box our corners. What we're going to do is cut out a 2" by 2" squares from the bottom of the fabric. Important. We are measuring from the stitch line, not the edge of the fabric. Your 2 by 2 square would be from the stitch line, not the edge of the fabric. So here I'm going to show you how to do that. What I do with my ruler is I will place the 2 centimeter on the line, just like this. And then I will draw a square around my edge. It'll look like this. So with the existing stitch line, it'll look just like a square. So we're going to do it to this side as well as the other side. Remember, we are just doing the bottom of the fabric. And because this is the lining, we will do the exact same thing to the other fabric. So we will do a 2 by 2 square on the lining fabric as well as the main fabric. I did have to switch out my chalk because the white chalk will not show up on this fabric. So I found a fabric marker that will fade over time. Now that we have our squares on the fabric, the next step is to cut them out. So you're going to cut on those lines that you made. Cut only the bottom half of the fabric. Our next step now is going to be closing up that hole. What we are going to do is open it up. We are going to bring the side seams together, just like this. We're going to smush it together and line up the open hole so that it lays flat and can close. Once we have it flat, we are going to stitch a line across the opening. So I'm going to put a clip here and we'll stitch from the top to the bottom. We want to make sure we don't fold it over like this. We want to open it up so that our sides are touching. Our side seams that we created are touching. And then I'll put a clip right here so I can show you. And then we'll stitch across the top from here all the way across the top. We won't stop in the middle. We're going to go straight across. And what we do to the inside, we do to the outside. So you just want to make sure that the fabric isn't folded in. You want to make sure it comes out. Make sure that's flat. Now for the side seams, you can either lay them opposite sides. It's the method I prefer. Or you can open up your seam so that they lay flat on both sides, just like this. It's up to you how you want to do it. I personally prefer to lay them opposite directions. So I like to make sure this part right here is laying flat. Sometimes it gets twisted. But now that we have it clipped, we're just going to sew the holes closed. So when we sew these closed, we are still using our half seam allowance. So we'll make sure the fabric is lined up to the inside of the foot. For this part right here, I do start on the fabric, do a few stitches forward, and when I backstitch as far back as I can. Because this fabric is at an angle, sometimes it'll be a little bit further back. So I'll do the backstitch all the way back and then continue forward. Once you get to the end of the fabric, we're doing a backstitch right here as well. Right here you can see that I started a little bit in and then backstitch and then came across. So you just want to make sure it's closed up as much as possible. Now that our bottoms are boxed out, this is what it looks like. You can start to see the shape here. That's why I love doing the box corners. We're going to go ahead and flip the main fabric right side out, and then you'll actually see what it's starting to look like. So we're going to sit these to the side. We're done with these for now, and next we are going to start on our straps. We're going to take both the straps and open them up, pretty sides facing down. We're going to start with one fabric strip. So I'm going to sit this one to the side. What we're going to do is fold it hot dog style. So we'll bring the bottom up. The reason we're folding it is to get that pressure line. An iron would be really good for this part of the instructions, but I'm just going to use my hand. This fabric is really good about leaving those pressure marks. So we want that center line, so I'm using my fingers to like brush up and down the fabric so that I get that line. Once we think it's all good, we're going to open it back up, and then we are going to fold that bottom line up to that middle line. Right here is where I will use clips. So I'm going to fold it up a little bit, take a clip and clip it at the bottom just to hold the fabric in place. Now the second part of this is we're going to fold the top down to meet the center as well. Once we do that, we're going to fold it one more time so that it overlaps the bottom half of this strap. So once I fold it to meet that center line, what I'm going to do is fold it down one more time, and then I'm going to take those clips that I have at the bottom of them and just clip them again to clip both sides of this strap down. So we are all done with this strap. As you can see, it's folded onto itself. So I'm going to sit this one to the side, and we're going to do the exact same thing to the second one. And here we are, both straps are done, and next thing we're going to do is sew it down. So I like to start right here where the straps are open. So what we're going to do is sew as close as we can to that edge so that our strap stays closed. We're going to sew all the way down to the bottom, and I like to do it all in one motion, so we'll turn at the bottom and then come back up the side. I like to do stitch on both sides. It just gives it that uniform look, but you don't have to if you don't want to. So like I said before, we're going to sew as close to this edge as possible just because we want that to close. We're going to make sure the fabric is laid on top of each other, and I am going to line the fabric up with that center line again, which is the 1/8 seam allowance. So right there in the center, that's where I will line my fabric up at. Because this fabric is a lot smaller, my hand placement is closer, and as you see, I'm slowly moving along with it just because I want that side to be as closed as possible. So I'm just following along. Remember, we're not pushing or pulling it, it's just guiding the fabric underneath the foot. When we get to the bottom, I like to just turn it, go across the bottom and back up the side, but you don't need to go across the bottom. You could just cut it off and then continue up the side like we did on the other side, just because the bottom will get caught in between the fabric. So the bottom stitch will not be shown. The same thing goes for this side as well. You don't have to go across the bottom edge of this, but I figured since I'm here, I'm just going to finish it all the way around. Remember to always do your back stitch once you are done with that stitch. So here's what it looks like. Like I said, I like the double lines because it makes it look flatter. And as you can see right here, the two edges are closed inside. So that's what's our goal. That's the reason why we get so close to the edge, but not too close. At this point, we should have both straps sewn down. The next step is we are going to attach our straps to the main body of the bag. So I'm going to grab a ruler, and right here we're going to measure about 3 inches from the side seams. So once we find the 3 inches from the side seam, we're going to line up the raw edges of the strap to the raw edges of the bag, just like this. I'm going to clip it in place, and then I will use the exact same strap. Make sure it's not flipped incorrectly, and then I will put 3 inches from the other side, matching the raw edges of the strap to the raw edges of the bag. So after that, we're gonna take the other strap and do the same to the back. A really quick way to do it is just measure the front straps and place the back straps on at the same measurements. We're going to take it over to the sewing machine and do what is called a basting stitch across just the straps, and that is just going to hold it in place until we're ready to sew it all together. To get a basting stitch on my machine, we are stitching at a 0-1, and as you can see, a basting stitch on here is at a 0-6. I know most machines don't come with that, so I'm going to show you how to switch it to a basting stitch using the stitch length. Up here is where that is at. The first one is stitch width, that's how wide it goes, and this one is the stitch length. Mine is set to a 2.5, that's normally the standard, so what we're going to do is change it to a 5.0. We're just going to stitch over the strap. Because this is a basting stitch, it does not have to be directly at the top. So I'm going to leave the clip on, and I'm just going to sew straight across the strap. There is no back stitching for this because at the end we're going to end up pulling the stitches out. We're just going to raise the needle and cut the thread. And then from here, we're going to do it to all of the straps. Right here, you can see the difference where the 2.5 is a lot smaller and the 5.0 is wider. Here you can see that I finished up all the straps. You could go ahead and take the clips off, and it's just there to hold it in place. We are almost finished, guys. I promise we're almost done. So our next step, after we have attached our straps to the main part of the bag, we are going to stuff this into our lining. So remember, our lining is still wrong side out, so we're going to be putting right sides together. So here I am just stuffing the outside of the bag in the inside. We're going to make sure our straps are sandwiched in between both of them, and then we're going to line up those side seams and then clip it together so it holds it in place. To make sure both side seams are clipped together, so I just put a clip on one side and then the other. You are more than welcome to put as many clips on there as you like. Just make sure that all the raw edges are together, including the strap. So if you want, you could put a clip where the straps are at. Once everything is in line, what we're going to do is sew around the entire top. So we're going to sew the whole thing closed. So the front part of your machine, this part right here, it can come out, and if you take it out, it actually leaves a little gap underneath the machine so that it makes it easier for you to sew in a circle. What we're going to be using to sew this bag closed. So I'll just stuff it in there and then we're going to still be using the 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to make sure that our 5.0 is back to a 2.5. At 1/2 seam allowance, we're going to make sure that our fabric is lined up to the inside of the foot. Make sure that all layers of the fabric is lined up together. So our lining fabric, our main fabric, as well as our straps are all lined up to the inside of that foot. Doing a back stitch on this, so back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end. So right here you can see that it's starting to feel tight at the bottom. All you have to do is just pull it from the back and it'll come out the front. Just when you do that, make sure that your fabric stays lined up and that your strap is pointing straight down. Once we get to the edge, I like to go over the beginning of the seam and do a back stitch as well. And then we'll pull it off and cut it. I like to just double check and make sure that everything got caught where it's supposed to be. I'll check the inside and the outside, and as well as make sure the straps are in place. So remember that hole that we left at the beginning of the video? Well, now that's where the hole comes into place. We're going to open that up and we are going to pull everything out from that hole. You shouldn't break your stitches because we did that back stitch, which will give it extra strength. So you should be good to just go ahead and pull it out little by little. You are going to pull the black out as well. We have everything flipped out. We're just going to make sure those raw edges are pushed inside, and we're going to sew a quick stitch line to close up that hole. I did it at a 1/8 seam allowance so that it closes the hole up as much as possible. To do that, you're going to go ahead and stuff the lining to the inside of the bag. So you're just going to push it in. Those basting stitch we did on the straps, right now would be the time to pull it out. So I like to take one of the edges, make sure it's one at the top. If it's too tight, you can always use a seam ripper and pull it out, but I went to the other edge and just gave it a quick little pull, and it came right out just like that. Well, kind of just like that. And then the straps will come up, so you'll just go ahead and pull it from the rest of the sides as well. All those out, what I like to do is give it a nice good shake, and it'll help the lining go into the bag. So our last step will just be doing a top stitch around the entire bag. That will probably look best if we did it at a 1/8 seam allowance. What I like to do is just like squish it between my fingers to make sure it's all the way up. The pretty fabrics on the outside and the lining fabrics on the inside. We don't want the lining to peek out, but you can if you want to. I'm going to go ahead and remove the front of the sewing machine again and stick the bag into it, just like how we did to close it up. So look at it, like I said, I placed the fabric at the 1/8 mark, which is that center line. And from there, we're just gonna go around the entire bag. I do want to say, once we get to the straps, make sure the straps are out, not folded down towards the bag. We want the straps facing or pulled towards the outside. So once we get to the end, we'll do the exact same thing, stitch over the beginning and then do a back stitch. And now your bag should be finished. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you have a beautiful day.